You're listening to Chasing the Horizon, a podcast by, for, and about motorcyclists. This is episode 23, released on the 21st of May, 2018. Welcome to Chasing the Horizon, a podcast by, for, and about motorcyclists, brought to you by the BMW Motorcycle Owners of America. Subscribe in iTunes or stream from the website at horizon.bmwmoa.org. My name is Wes Fleming. Thanks for joining us. As regular listeners know, until this month I've been putting out just 2 episodes a month. I realized over the last few days that this gave me 2 whole weeks to gather motorcycle industry news for this first segment, and I also realized that when it's a slow news week, that puts a hurting on me for gathering news to tell y'all about. Bear with me, though, and we'll get through this together. If you're anything like me, you're disappointed that there's not more motorcycle programming on TV. Well, unbuckle your helmet and put up your feet, because TwoWheelsTV is setting out to be, quote, like Netflix for motorcycling, according to founder Alan Smith. TwoWheelsTV announced its soft launch at the Progressive IMS in Chicago back in early February, but as of this broadcast, it hasn't come to pass yet. You can go to the website, obviously that will be TwoWheelsTV.com, and sign up for a notification when it's available. The website says that when the streaming service fully launches, it will be available on Google Chromecast, Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Roku. The soft launch will bring support with apps for both Apple and Android mobile devices. No word on what the subscription fees will be, but if I can watch MotoGP, World Superbike, Moto America, and American Flat Track on my TV without having to jump through any more hoops than opening an app, I will absolutely pony up $10 a month. So far this season, I've had 2 filmmakers on the show, both of whom were running crowdfunding campaigns to finance their efforts. In addition, at least one of my other guests ran a crowdfunding campaign for a new product, and many of you may have participated in crowdfunding campaigns for various products in the past. Everybody's aware that the mere existence of a crowdfunding campaign is no guarantee of its success, but there has perhaps been no greater example of that in the recent past, at least in the motorcycle industry, than Skully. Skully planned the release of a helmet they purported to feature what they called augmented reality, a kind of heads-up system built around a 180-degree rear-view camera and a built-in GPS display. By the time Skully went bankrupt in August 2016, about 3,300 people had bought into Skully's crowdfunding and pre-order campaigns, and at about $1,500 each, a Skully helmet was not an inexpensive buy-in. The startup amassed about $2.4 million from crowdfunding, then raised another $11 million in 6 months. When release day for the helmet came, Skully shipped about 200 helmets, and those were missing the GPS integration, only had the rear view camera, which is still pretty impressive technology when you come to think about it. The company went down quickly just a few days after their disgruntled former bookkeeper sued the company's founders, brothers Marcus and Mitchell Weller. The bookkeeper, Isabel Faithhauer, said the Weller brothers, quote, used Skully corporate accounts as their personal piggy banks, a claim which the brothers, of course, denied. The lawsuit claimed the Weller brothers made a number of poor fiscal choices, including $2,000 spent on strippers and renting a Lamborghini for the weekend. Faithhauer later dropped the lawsuit, saying in a written statement that a reasonable jury could conclude that her claims were without merit. I told you that so I could tell you this. Skully appears to be back. The concept of the augmented reality helmet is back under new management, and now it's called Skully Technologies. It's a fresh pair of brothers, Ivan and Rafael Contreras. Ivan is the CEO of 2 other companies, Torote, which you probably haven't heard of, and Gas, which you may know about. Torote makes electric vehicles with 2 and 3 wheels, and of course Gas is a world-renowned maker of trial and enduro motorcycles. I think it's important to note here that Skully Technologies bought the assets of Skully, so even though the helmet is similar, the companies are completely different. The new helmet is called the Phoenix, spelled with an F, and the price has gone up $400 to $1,900, but they've upped the technology game along with the price. In addition to the cameras, the new Skully Phoenix will feature a heads-up display, turn-by-turn navigation, voice control, and smartphone integration through Bluetooth. Oh, and it's going to have a carbon fiber shell to boot. The new owners promise to put a portion of every new helmet's cost into a Make It Right campaign aimed at remunerating the original investors. I'm glad to see this augmented helmet back on the market because it's a fantastic idea. I absolutely wish I could afford one, and if I had $2,000 lying around doing nothing else, I would totally buy one. Now, I don't have any Royal Enfield news for you this time, but I do have some news involving my other motorcycle obsession, Indian. Indian is still dominating American flat track, and they're doing it with their FTR 750 race bike, which you can buy for just $50,000 if you like. The next horizon for the FTR 750 is stunting. Heavily awarded and highly competitive rider Travis Pastrana will be using one of these Indian race bikes to repeat not one, not two, but three of Evel Knievel's most famous stunts. And he's going to do it all three of the stunts in just 3 hours. Well, I guess he'll do all three of the stunts if he survives the first two. Pastrana will jump 52 crushed cars placed long end to long end, 16 Greyhound buses, and the fountain at Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas. Evel Knievel completed exactly none of these stunts successfully, with the Caesar's Palace jump leaving him with something like 40 broken bones and in a 29-day coma. Knievel's son Robbie made the Caesar's Palace jump in 1989, and Mike Metzger did the same jump and threw in a backflip for good measure in 2006, but those were one-off events. Pastrana's attempt at these three jumps will take place during Evel Live on July 8th, 2018. Certainly, if anybody can accomplish this three-jump feat of extreme stunting, it's Travis Pastrana, even if he has never jumped a V-twin motorcycle before. To finish things up, Motorcycle.com released their Electric Motorcycle Buyer's Guide for 2018. Check the show notes on the website for the link, and you can learn everything you need to know about electric motorcycles from Alta to Zero. The discussion portion of this episode features somebody that many of you may have heard of. His name is Mark Barnes, and he's a psychologist. Did I get that right, Mark? You're a psychologist, correct?
Yes, clinical psychologist.
Clinical psychologist that recently put out a book called Why We Ride that is built up from I don't want to make you sound old, but it's built up from decades of columns that you've written. Isn't that correct?
That is correct. Yes.
So
I am decades old.
Well, you know, it even if you start young, you can build up quite a body of work in even just 10 years of writing a regular column. Yes, the column that the book was actually a collection of columns from Motorcycle Consumer News, where I write a monthly page about psychological aspects of motorcycling, and they can range from things that have to do with riding technique or sports psychology, all the way through kind of quirky experiences that I've had or things that I've observed in my interactions with other motorcyclists, and trying to kind of delve into the layers of psychological meaning in these things that people may not typically think through. And I've been doing that for 20-some years, and it's been big fun for me. I write a lot of other kinds of material for the magazine other than as a psychologist. I write how-to technical articles and product reviews and other kinds of features, but the book is a collection of these columns that I've written as a psychologist. Right. And one of the things that I'm big about on the show is I always ask people when they use a term or talk about a concept that I'm not 100% solid on, whether it's, industrial or otherwise. But I'm sure that a lot of people ask this question, and I feel like I have to ask it. But can you briefly kind of break down the difference between a psychologist and a psychiatrist? Because I know they're different, but I always have to look it up, and so I'm sure other people get confused too.
Certainly. It's not like it's the first time I've heard that question. psychologists are at least doctoral psychologists, so PhDs, or there's another version called a PsyD, P-S-Y-D. These are graduate school doctorates, whereas a psychiatrist is a medical doctor, and so they have gone to medical school and they write prescriptions. I do therapy and various kinds of evaluations and assessments and so forth. So the psychiatrist is the MD and the psychologist is the PhD.
Gotcha. Okay, so now that's clear. I think everybody could understand that. And I know every time you never want to get that wrong. You never want to call somebody the thing that they're not, because then they have to correct you. So I made sure that I looked up what you are before I opened my mouth. Now, normally I talk to people, when I talk to people on the show, I ask them about how they got into motorcycling and what their first motorcycle was. But I'm actually going to break from tradition, and I'm not going to ask you that question, because I want to move us into the whole reason that I sought you out to talk to you in the first place, which is selling motorcycles. So I know you're trying to sell a couple of motorcycles right now. Tell me about the motorcycles that you're looking to move this spring.
Okay. I have at least several that I think I'm going to let go of. I have a total of 6 in my stable, but I have a couple of KTM dirt bikes. One is they're both '09 models. One's a 250 XCW, which is a 2-stroke, and the other is a 530 XCW, which is a 4-stroke that I've sort of nominally made street legal. So that serves as my kind of dual purpose or dual sport adventure kind of machine. And then I have a couple KTM street bikes, one of which is a Super Duke 990. I think that's an '07. That one I can't part with. But I have a 2010 Duke 690, which is kind of a very quirky bike that has a bit of a cult status. And even though there's a lot to love about that motorcycle, somehow I just have not ever, I haven't gelled with it. And I've tried, and I've actually sunk a lot of money into it, trying to perfect it, but there's just something fundamental about it that doesn't suit me. And I expect that we'll be talking some about this phenomenon of sinking money into motorcycles that you then have to sell, and it involves extra pain, man.
Yeah, actually, that's a great segue into the reason that I tracked you down in the first place. Which, Facebook is an amazing thing. I put out a message on Facebook asking the folks that I'm connected with, hey, does anybody know a psychologist that rides motorcycles? And one of your friends that's local to you said, yeah, I know this guy that rides motorcycles. He's a psychologist. And she put me together with you, of course, not knowing that I'd heard of you before, because I read motorcycle consumer news. So it just kind of reinforced that whole small world thing. And what I've been thinking about and working on is this idea that when it's time to sell a motorcycle, we have this emotional connection to our motorcycle. Many of us, it's more than just something that we, ride on the weekends or ride up the mountain or ride across the country. A motorcycle, I think, because of how intimately we have to engage with it to operate it. It's different than just climbing in a car and driving off. You have to really connect with the motorcycle to operate it safely. And I think because of that, and like you said, because of the money that we put into them, when it comes time to sell them, I see a lot of people that overvalue the motorcycle. And maybe what it is I'm undervaluing the motorcycle because I have a little bit of a background of working in a shop where I see busted up bikes all the time. And when I look at a bike, I kind of look at a collection of parts that I might have to sell rather than a unit that somebody could hop on and ride away. And that led me to investigate something that I remember reading about several years ago about people who buy flat pack furniture from someplace like IKEA, and then they go home and they put together their Billy bookcase or whatever it is. And when somebody asks them how much they think that bookcase is worth, they think it's worth more than they paid for it because they put it together themselves. They put their kind of effort, sometimes a good amount of cursing and sweat into putting one of these things together. I'm firmly convinced that, the divorce rates spike when IKEA has a sale, those kinds of things. But that's kind of why I wanted to talk to you. And it just happens to be really coincidental and fortuitous that you're selling motorcycles right now, because we can really kind of dig into it about where this phenomenon comes from. So tell me a little bit about what you've done to your 690, which clearly you wanted to like more than you do, or you wanted it to fit you better than it does. So how did you start making modifications to get that bike to suit you more effectively?
Well, actually, I think the very first thing I did was get rid of the stock seat, which I believe must be the all-time worst seat in the history of motorcycling. It was horrendous. And although maybe not for everybody, but what it did to me was lock me into a particular riding position that might be appropriate if you're bombing corners on a super motard, which is kind of the style of this motorcycle, but it was really uncomfortable for everything else. So I got a fancy Renasco Racing custom seat for it that did help some, but I think it's just the basic architecture of the motorcycle is still more super motard than I guess what I'm suited for. And the bike itself is, I got it because I wanted something that was really flickable and aggressive. What I didn't count on was that the bike really only wants to be ridden that way, and it's no good to just kind of ride more casually. I did some fuel injection modifications. I put a Dynajet box in it, the Power Commander 5, and did the auto tune module with that, which involved having to mod the header pipe to get an O2 sensor in there. I put a different I put a Leo Vinci muffler on it. Got rid of the stock muffler and did some things with the controls, heated grips. I think they're arc levers, and put a Scott steering damper on it because it does want to lift the front, and so when it comes down, sometimes you get a shimmy if your bars aren't haven't stayed straight. Those are the things that come to mind. I know there's more, but that's the basics. The other two motorcycles that I listed also have loads and loads and loads of mods on them that were meant to make them, fit me, and in some ways they really are kind of perfected for me, but they're as perfected as they can be for what they are, just like the 690. There's some, it's still fundamentally the same motorcycle, and it turns out that it's something in that fundamental zone that I don't get along with.
Right. So it sounds like I just want to kind of play this back out loud. It sounds like that you made some ergonomic upgrades or improvements with the seat, and then you went after some performance updates to make it behave more like you envisioned it behaving. And along the way, you threw in some comfort updates too. So I think a steering damper kind of meets that in the middle, kind of performance, kind of sanity saving. Certainly heated grips. I don't know why anybody makes a motorcycle that doesn't have heated grips, because, I love those things. And certainly the changing the seat is something that I hear a lot of people say. It's funny that you say that your KTM had the worst seat ever, because you talk to some BMW riders and they say, oh, well, my GS had the worst seat ever. And, I've got right now I've got 3 motorcycles myself, and not one of them has the stock seat on it, because like you, that's the first thing that goes. I ride it for, a couple thousand miles, and I'm like, wow, this seat sucks. I got to get something better.
Right.
And everybody's different, which is why there's 912 seat makers out there, instead of just one guy out there kind of stitching them back together. So did you, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, the only bike that I have that doesn't have an aftermarket seat on it is my trials bike, because it doesn't have a seat.
It doesn't have a seat, right? Yeah, I've seen. Now, are you as? This is going to be kind of a leading question, but are you as good as those guys that you see on the YouTube?
Oh, not even in the same universe. No. No.
But you're out there trying it. I think that trials riding is just amazing, to be able to exert that level of control over a motorcycle.
Yeah, it's beautiful to watch. I'm not beautiful to watch, however.
Well, it takes practice, right?
Those guys are. Yeah.
So to keep us on track, sorry, I didn't mean to get off track there. So did you buy the 690 new?
No, I actually, I got a screaming deal on eBay on that bike. It only had, I think it had less than 1,000 miles on it. But I got it, I guess, if it was a 2010, maybe I got it in 2012, 2013. Somewhere in there, 2013, I think.
Okay, so you got it lowly or little used, lightly used, I guess they would call it.
Yes.
So,
and after I loaded it up with all these aftermarket goodies, I've completely negated the great deal that I got on the bike originally.
Of course, that's kind of how it goes. So now you know in your head how much money you've got into the bike, but there's more that you've got into it as well. And this is kind of why I really wanted to talk to a psychologist, because you guys tend to understand, or at least have more insight into, how we make decisions, our decision-making processes, those kind of thought patterns. And maybe it's simply that you just talk to so many people that you kind of can see the patterns over time. So you got a smoking deal on a used bike. You brought it home. Didn't quite fit the way you wanted, didn't quite run the way you wanted. So you started making updates, and now, 6 months, a year, 2 years later, you've completely wiped out the cost savings. Clearly, you've kind of struggled with this from a mental standpoint. You want to like the bike, you want to love the bike, but it's just not working for you. And you realize that the best situation is to sell it. So now you start thinking about, well, I paid this much for it, and the seat cost this much, and the dyno tuning costs this much, and the power commander, and you kind of start looking all, ka-ching, ka-ching, ka-ching. I imagine the cartoon character with the dollar signs in their eyes. And now you have to put a value on that bike to try to sell it to somebody else. So what was your process in trying to figure out what you needed to sell that bike for to be happy with the sale?
Well, I must point out that you have given me too much credit. I'm not yet at that point. I should confess that all 3 of these bikes I have believed I was going to put them up for sale for the last several years. And I have been unable to bring myself to actually pull the trigger on that. And I may not do it this year, but that is my plan. And what I run up against, which I think is kind of part of what you're getting at, is that when I do start to consider what I would actually be able to sell it for, it is so painful to take the loss financially, let alone, whatever sentimental value a bike might have for me. But when I go to consider all of the money that I will not get back out of it, it locks me up and I can't go forward with the sale. And I think it is a function of a basic element of human nature, which is our resistance to mourning, grieving. Life involves plenty of loss without us kind of volunteering for another one. And, so we drag our feet and we don't do things that we really know we need to. We know it's not going to get any better to wait, and yet, we still procrastinate or avoid those kinds of decisions. I mean, in the 3 years that I've been dithering about selling these bikes, I mean, they haven't appreciated in value.
No, they don't do that, do they?
They've all gone down. And so, it's not like I've really reduced the amount of pain I'm going to feel, but I haven't been able to put it off. And unfortunately, that's very often how human beings do things.
Yeah.
And they will put them off, even though it's worse in the long run.
So answer this for me then. Have you looked at any kind of online resource, or even MCN has a annual used bike valuation? Have you looked to see what the industry thinks your bike is worth from a baseline?
Yeah, I have in the past. I can't tell you what those numbers are right now because I'm procrastinating.
Right.
But I have looked at it in the past, and it makes me cringe. And even if I think, well, the 690 does have something of a cult status, maybe that's going to be worth a bit if I find just the right person who's looking for one of these things. They'll be willing to pay top dollar. Some people will appreciate the mods I've made, but you certainly don't get anything like the money that those mods cost out of them, even when somebody, likes the particular configuration that you've put together. But, customization is tricky business.
Sure.
In that, the mods that I've made reflect idiosyncrasies of mine and don't necessarily appeal to somebody else, even if they were expensive mods or they were high quality pieces or whatever. If it's not what somebody else is into, then it's worthless.
Exactly. So, knowing that the 690 has a little bit of a cult following, and that's kind of, for better or for worse, that kind of ends up being a good initial target market, because you can probably find somebody in that band of riders who has always wanted one of those, that model, that year, that configuration. So what you kind of end up is finding somebody who kind of already loves the bike before they even get it.
Right. That was me. I was excited about that model from reading about it, but I had never ridden one. When I got it I live in Tennessee, and I got it from a guy in Massachusetts, via eBay. So Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry to interrupt, but
No, that's okay.
I just want to point out that's how I got it, because I had loved that particular generation of the bike from afar, having never even seen or ridden one in person.
So you were kind of already sucked in before you even found it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've been there myself. You know, you click through the eBay listings and you go, oh yeah, that's even the color that I like. Well, let me just see how far away the guy lives. And you start thinking, well, that's a day up and a day back, and I could borrow Pete's trailer and it wouldn't be that big of a hassle, and I could do it over the weekend. So you end up, you kind of work yourself into a frenzy over it. And then when you get a deal on it, you really feel good that, you know, I got a good deal. I only have to go to, Massachusetts to Tennessee is a pretty good trip. But,
well, I had it shipped. I had that one shipped, but I've driven across several states to pick up other bikes.
Yeah. And, you know, we do that. I drove a motorcycle I live in Virginia. At the time, I lived just outside of Washington, D.C., and I drove a bike on a trailer all the way to Columbus, Ohio, so a guy from Missouri could meet me there to buy the bike. He'd always wanted this, you know, same bike, same color, you know, good condition that I was selling. And I could see how excited he was when he showed up in the middle of January. It was a miserable trip, but he was so excited. And it was an interesting experience, because by that point I had already replaced the bike. So all I wanted to do was get it out of my garage. And I'd kind of, from an emotional standpoint, I had moved on, and that was a tough decision for me, because that particular motorcycle was the first one that my daughter ever rode anywhere with me on. You know, she had grown up around motorcycles and she couldn't wait till she was big enough to ride with me. So that was a pretty, when I signed that bike over, I had that little twinge of regret, you know, that little kind of onset of grief. I'll never see this motorcycle again. This is the bike that my daughter always wanted to ride, you know. Yeah. But luckily for me, the guy didn't negotiate too much. I asked a fair price, and I hadn't done a lot of modifications to it, so I didn't really have a lot of money into it. So from a business standpoint, it was a little easier for me to let go of that bike. It was the emotional aspects that were really difficult. So how do you think we form these emotional attachments to machines? That's kind of an odd phenomenon, I think.
Well, yes. I mean, obviously machines aren't things that we can actually have a real relationship with, but people do end up having a certain kind of relationship with their machines. I mean, they love them, and you know, invest a lot of blood, sweat, and tears and money into them, and they feel like the machine, or I feel like the machine has, you know, been my companion on various adventures, and we've been through hard times together. The machine provides me with a kind of joy and distraction, and it's, you know, in many ways it's more reliable than a flesh and blood organism. You know, I don't have to work around its schedule to spend time with it. If something goes wrong, even though it may be expensive or involve a lot of effort, you know, it can be fixed. It can be made new. You know, that doesn't happen in human relationships. I mean, obviously people can repair problems in their relationships, but it's obviously not as simple and easy as ordering a new part and
bolting it on
the old one.
Yeah.
And
certainly, you know, putting a new chain and sprockets on my bike, while it requires some effort and it requires proper tools, I'd rather do that than, apologize to my wife after I've made a mistake and made her angry and screwed something up. Yeah. Because, I can go out and it has a clear delineation. I have a problem. I need a new chain and sprockets. I have the parts. I have the tools. I do the work, and it's done. Where when you develop a problem in your relationship, it's often sometimes difficult to identify the problem. And, I'm just going to ignore everybody, and you and I are going to have a therapy session right here. It's sometimes difficult to figure out what the problem is, because you might be arguing about something that is ancillary to the actual problem. And then once you identify it, because we're people and we have, we're very complex organisms, our thought processes, our feelings, it's difficult to repair relationships. Not everybody is successful at it. Some people are, certainly. So I think that, I think you're really onto something there, because, we can identify a problem with the motorcycle, we can fix it, and we can get back to the way it used to be, the way it always has been between me and the motorcycle. We can go on another trip. All I have to do is, replace the final drive, or new chain and sprockets, or steering head bearings, or something like that.
Right, and beyond breaking even, you can also unilaterally make it more the way you want it. You don't have to negotiate.
Right.
So if you want to move things more in a certain direction, well, you can make modifications without the motorcycle's permission or agreement on that, and it really is all in your hands. Whereas in a real relationship, somebody's going to meet you part way.
Yeah. So if we're going to, and maybe I'm just, maybe I'm overthinking things here. If we want to engage the process of selling our motorcycle, and let's say that, I want to sell, I've set myself a deadline. It's, I want to sell this motorcycle in 3 months or less. So in order to kind of mitigate the emotional response, what's a good place to start? Once you make the decision to sell your motorcycle, what's a good way to start thinking about how to approach assigning a value to it? Even if your value is completely skewed,
right.
when you sit down to sell when you finally get serious about selling your 690, what's the first thing you're going to do?
Well, I should say I've sold, 25 or so motorcycles in the past. So I really have been able to actually follow through on this process before. And I guess the way that I've done it is to survey the market. And that means looking at the Kelley Blue Book and the NADA values. I get on the Craigslist that's in my area and see if comparable bikes are for sale there and see what people are asking for them. That doesn't mean they get that price, but
Sure.
At least I have some notion about, what a potential buyer is going to be seeing when they start hunting for a bike like mine. And I'll get on eBay and do the same sort of research there, except I haven't looked lately, but it used to be that, I imagine it's the same now, but eBay actually will let you see what things have actually sold for. So you're not just speculating on the basis of people's asking prices. You're
Right.
seeing what sellers actually paid.
Yeah.
And so that gives me some realistic data. I think information is your friend, even when it's not what you wanted to hear. And so I collect all that kind of information. When you've got thousands of dollars of mods in a bike, and I don't think you can help but try to ask for something more than what what stock bikes of that sort are selling for. And with the knowledge that perhaps somebody, you may have to let somebody talk you down if you're not getting a lot of hits on the, you're not getting a lot of people inquiring about your machine. If it's just dead air, then you have to be willing to lower your price when somebody does show some interest, or you have to lower your price just to get the phone to ring.
Right. Now, I do. And when I sell a bike, I always build in a little bit of wiggle room into my asking price. So let's say I'm pretty sure I can sell this motorcycle for $4,200. I'm going to list it at $4,500. So that, and I kind of feel like I'm playing a little mind game with the guy, you know. So let's say he sees a price of $4,500. He goes, well, I like that bike, but I only want to pay $4,000 for it. He doesn't know what I really want to get for it.
Right.
You know, so when he comes in and says, hey, I'm willing to give you $4,000 for that. And I go, how about 4,300? He'll go, I don't know. What about 42? And we both walk away happy, and I've won my game, and he's won his game. We both win our respective mind games. Is there any kind of...
Because he didn't offer you... His $4,000 bid was not what he was really hoping to buy it for either. He was hoping that you would meet him somewhere in the middle.
Right.
I mean, I think buyers and sellers, you're right. They're both playing a game there, and as long as they've met in the middle, both sides feel like they've gotten away with something.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and maybe that's why we form these really tight bonds, emotional bonds with our motorcycles, is because, you know, they don't play games with us.
Well, yeah, unless we're talking about an electrical problem.
I'm sorry. One of my bikes blows a main fuse it's random at this point. It just happens. And now I recognize the symptoms, and I keep a spare fuse or two under the seat. So I know when my gauges die, I have to pull over, open up the fuse box, pull out the burnt one. And I cannot for the life of me figure out why this keeps happening. And it drives me crazy. But my response is to just change the fuse. It's easier than digging into the electrical system to find out where the short is.
Yeah.
Sorry. So that just got me electrical.
Those are my, I hate those worse than anything. I'd much rather tear a motor apart than chase down an electrical gremlin.
Absolutely. So let me ask you a couple more questions about your kind of your selling process. So you've been, for lack of a better term, you've been procrastinating on actually selling these motorcycles for some time. Are you already looking at your next bike? Are you thinking, well, with the money that I make from these, from the dirt bike and the nominal dual sport and your street bike, I can sell these 3 bikes, and that will let me get, an X, this other kind of bike that I've also kind of always thought about having. So does that enter into your process at all? Or are you just like, I got to clear out the garage?
No, I'm glad you brought that up, because it really has been a factor in years past. And I would have either already bought the next motorcycle, or I would be so fixated on it that, letting go of the one that I was replacing was a much easier process. And it just so happens that currently, the bikes that I've ended up with, they really actually do such a good job of keeping me satisfied that it's real hard to develop the same kind of motivation, about getting the next machine. That said, there are some bikes now that really do appeal to me, that I do want to replace these bikes with. And while it's not powerful enough of a motivation that I've already gotten these things up on the block, I do have other bikes in mind, and I do feel like, once I've got income from these sales, that money is really already spent. It's already committed to the next machines.
Do you think it's a different process in, so I bought this bike and now I have to sell this other one to make some of the money back, as opposed to I'd really like to have that bike, but I need to sell this one first?
Oh, yes. That is, in my experience, at least, those are very different scenarios. And I wish I could say that I've had the impulse control to, mostly have sold the old bike first before I bought the new one. But in truth, it's really been the other way around. And so then I am kind of in a bind sometimes and feel like, now I really, I've already spent the money. Now I've got to replace that money with the sale. And I guess at times that has probably influenced my willingness to sell for a certain price. I'd be in more of a hurry. I might not hold out as long for what I need out of the bike. Ironically, that's the opposite of how it ought to work. If I've already spent the money, I really, really, really need to make sure I get all my money out of the old one. But that's not how it works, because so little of human behavior is actually governed by logic. We like to think of ourselves as rational creatures, and indeed sometimes some of us act to some degree rationally, but really emotional factors are what drive human behavior. And emotions aren't rational.
No, not even a little bit sometimes.
No. And so if you're hot to trot for a new machine and you're worried that your dealer's only got one, and if you don't buy it now, somebody else is going to buy it out from under you, and too bad that you haven't already sold your other motorcycle. You got to have this one now. Yeah,
I can eat mac and cheese for a month, right?
Yeah, right.
Well, sorry, kind of lost my train of thought there real quick. The whole idea of rationality introduces a kind of an interesting aspect to it, because that if we were perfectly rational, or if we were more rational than our emotions allow us to be, I guess, I think we would have much less difficulty assigning a value to the motorcycle. And I think people looking for a motorcycle like ours would have much less difficulty accepting or rejecting the price that we've settled on.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. Although, I don't know that, I don't know that life would be better if we were more rational. I think it then would be very hard to justify buying the motorcycle at all.
Yeah, that's probably true, because I already have a car. What do I need a motorcycle for too? Right.
And I'm reminded of some research that was done long ago, and I can't remember enough about it to give you any sort of citation, but there was a study done where people who had various kinds of brain injuries that essentially disconnected the emotional parts of their brain.
Okay.
So they were left with sort of like Mr. Spock on Star Trek. So these were people who were uninfluenced by emotion in the normal sense. And the idea was, these people must be perfect decision makers because they don't have emotion interfering with the process. But actually what happened was they couldn't make a decision to save their life because there was no reason to want one thing over another. Emotions are behind our choices ultimately. And without them, there's no desire. There's no reason to choose one thing over another.
Sure, that absolutely makes sense. And I'm actually really glad that you said Mr. Spock before I did, because people already think I'm a nerd. So I was really resisting the urge to say, yeah, just like Spock.
Yeah, no.
But I don't know that he would ride a motorcycle.
I think not.
So before I let you go, because I'm sure you're busy. We're all busy, right? That's life. Plus, you got motorcycles to sell.
Right. Maybe I'll be inspired by this conversation and go take the pictures for the ads now.
There you go. I kind of want to ask you a question that might be a little bit off topic, but it kind of plays into your history with the magazine, because I'm sure, like myself, you get invited to the occasional bike launch or something like that, where you get an opportunity as a member of the motorcycle press to ride a new motorcycle or a newly updated motorcycle before anybody else even gets to see it, in person.
Right.
So when you do one of those events, there's the manufacturer is there, there's support there, you're there with other people who are in the same industry that we're in, that are doing the same thing that we're doing. How does that kind of play to your perceptions of the new motorcycle or the new updated motorcycle? How do you think it does anyways?
Well, first of all, I haven't done a lot of that. I've been to a handful of those kinds of events. And certainly the manufacturers are bending over backwards to generate excitement and point out all of the wonderful things about the new models. Actually, when I've done that, here's not at all the answer that you were hoping for.
That's okay.
But I can tell you, my experience at those things is actually one of high anxiety, because I don't like riding an unfamiliar motorcycle, no matter how wonderful it is. In fact, even when the more wonderful it is, the more I'm worried about wrecking a motorcycle that I don't own, and then making a mess or incurring expense or whatever. So I'm probably not the guy to ask about those kinds of events.
Well, I'm actually really glad to hear you say that, because I went on my first press launch last summer, and I spent about a day and a half of the 2 days absolutely terrified I was going to wreck this brand new motorcycle that nobody could even buy yet. And it really affected it affected my riding. I'm not sure that it in fact affected my opinion of the motorcycle, because to a certain extent, what it made me do was really focus on the bike and the ride and the people around me, and paying attention to what I was doing. And really, I found that I really had to focus on the motorcycle to make sure that I didn't miss a shift, and that I didn't snag my pant leg on the peg as I was putting my foot down and drop the brand new bike in front of a whole parking lot full of motorcycle journalists. That was my night. I actually had that nightmare 2 nights in a row.
Right.
But have you ever walked away from, and I've done one, and I think it actually works a little better if, like yourself, you've only done a handful of them, because when you do them, month after month, year after year after year, I think maybe you kind of get jaded a little bit. It becomes routine, and anytime something becomes routine, you kind of lose a little bit of perspective on it, where maybe you and I haven't done enough of them to reach that point. So we still have that anxiety. Yeah.
And, when I have given input on a bike for the magazine, I feel like what I actually have to contribute is a kind of naive perspective that, I don't do this kind of thing on a regular basis like some of the other people that I've been associated with in the magazine, who are much, much more experienced in such things than I am. But the fact of the matter is that the person reading the article is probably more like me. And, they don't have, they haven't ridden hundreds and hundreds of new motorcycles. And I'd like to think that my perspective has relevance, even though in some ways it's more limited.
Yeah, I think that's a good perspective on it. So before we go here, I just want to give you one more opportunity to kind of plug your book a little bit and tell folks what's the best way they can go about buying a copy of Why We Ride.
Go to Amazon.
There you
go. Look up that title. I'll warn you in advance. You will find other things with that title, including a feature film that came out, several years ago with the very same title. I did not copy that title.
I will take your word for it.
I had that title long before that movie came out. It was actually, the book is named after a series of pieces that I did where I surveyed the readership on various things about why they rode and what sort of peak experiences they'd had and what kept them riding. And that series of articles was entitled Why We Ride, and it actually gave the findings of those surveys, or that survey. It was a single survey, had a lot of questions in it. And but anyway, go to Amazon, search for Why We Ride. Buy the movie if you want to, but the book is mine.
It's not a bad movie. I've seen it.
Yeah.
And what I always include links in the show notes that go on the website and in the email newsletter that goes out about the show. So I'll make sure that I go to Amazon and get the link for the book, Why We Ride, not the movie. But, people should still watch the movie if they want to. It's a pretty good movie.
It is a good movie.
Yeah. And I really want to thank you a lot for your time, and I appreciate you coming on the show to talk about, what goes through our heads when we try to sell a motorcycle. I really appreciate it.
Well, you're very welcome. Thank you for having me. It's been big fun.
Since I recorded our discussion, Mark has washed and photographed his motorcycles, including the Duke that he talks about, and posted them for sale. I know we all wish him luck in selling the bikes. Because this podcast is produced by the BMW Motorcycle Owners of America, in every episode I highlight one benefit of being a member. I admit it's an enticement to get you over to our website and get you to join for at least 1 year. I've been a member since 1999 and have used the member benefits to my advantage countless times since then, especially the Roadside Assistance Program. But that's not what I'm going to tell you about today. Today it's all about the MOA's annual rally, which takes place this year in July in Des Moines, Iowa. Don't take my word for it, though. Here's Brian Hinton, the rally chair.
As life progresses and we get older, we tend to settle into routine. We grow up, start families, and settle down. We worry about our careers and only later in life begin doing the things that we've dreamed of. In our world today, technology has advanced the way people communicate. We are now an instant society where information is at our fingertips and only a few seconds away. It is my goal to highly encourage all BMW MOA members to take a moment and share your experience of motorcycling with others. Maybe even someone you wouldn't normally speak to, maybe someone from the younger generation. Your inspiration could be the difference in our motorcycling world. Young riders today are very passionate about style, imagery, and the emotional connection they have with their machines. When you break it down to the simplest way of thinking, young riders today are not all that different than the young riders of yesterday. The excitement of getting on your motorcycle, the feeling of freedom while riding, the experience of being in the picture, not just looking at the picture. Those are all things that are synonymous with being on two wheels. I encourage you to talk with your friends and your fellow motorcycle companions about your experience at a rally, be it an international MOA rally, a chartered club rally, or any motorcycle gathering that you've been to. Spread the word that motorcycling is good for the soul, and being with like-minded friends takes our experiences to a higher level. I also strongly encourage you to mark your calendars for July 12th through the 15th, 2018, for the BMW MOA International Rally in Des Moines, Iowa. I promise it will be an epic experience that you will long remember.
Before I sign off for this episode, I'd like to remind you to check out our website at horizon.bmwmoa.org. You can stream every episode I've ever put out and get links for all the news items and the things the guests talk about on each episode's page. There are also blog entries written by myself and other folks. If you'd like to be a guest writer on the blog, send me an email to podcast@bmwmoa.org. You can sign up for the show's email newsletter at tinyletter.com/chasingthehorizon. The podcast is on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram too. I like to post photos from you listeners on Instagram, so feel free to email those to me. And be sure to include motorcycles and as many smiling faces as possible in those photos. You can also email me with suggestions for people you'd like me to try to get on the show. Thank you for coming back for the 23rd episode of Chasing the Horizon, which featured a discussion with Mark Barnes, a clinical psychologist and motorcycle journalist. Our next episode will feature a discussion with Scott Auld, a motorcycle rider just like you. That episode will be out on May 28th. Andrew Finberg composed and recorded our theme music. Karen Halker designed our logo. Thanks again to all our guests and listeners for giving us their time. We'll see you out there somewhere on the road, or off it. Ride safe.